So I'll get us started this morning. Thanks everyone for joining us. And welcome to the third of a 6-session series for our kind of EDI Roundtable series. My name is Emma Wallace, and I'm a program specialist here at ECVO at Edmonton Chamber of Voluntary Organizations. Before we get started and I give too much context, I want to recognize that we're hosting this event on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place, traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We also acknowledge all of the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for millennia. And I welcome all of our participants to share in the chat where they're coming from today if they feel comfortable. We offer gratitude and solidarity to the Indigenous people who have and continue to care for, protect, and defend this land. As organizations, ECVO and the Center for Race and Culture are glad to have a public platform through which we can continue to promote learning, collaboration, and the exchange of information for the betterment of our communities here on Treaty 6. And then I do want to leave us all with a bit of a reminder before we get started. I do a land acknowledgement on all of our events, but specifically we've been doing one for this event at the beginning. And that reminder is just that although a land acknowledgement is important, it is just a first step. Relationship building and allyship are continuous processes in our journey towards reconciliation. So with that in mind, I'll thank everyone again for joining us this morning. Whether it's your first time or you've attended one of our last sessions. As I said, this is a 6-part series and it's hosted by Center for Race and Culture and ECVO. In this series, we're diving into concepts and issues around equity, diversity, and inclusion as they relate to the nonprofit sector. We had heard from many of you that there was kind of a need for learning and for meaningful conversation in the space. And so this series is just one way we can try and support learning and reflection around EDI. And today's topic is around accessibility. So if you have any questions throughout the hour, feel free to submit them in the question box. You're also welcome to use the chat function. I see some of you already have, to kind of share comments, resources, or connect with other audience members. We might not have time to answer all of our questions today, but following this session, a recording of the panel, as well as a summary document will be sent out. And then kind of a last housekeeping piece. We do have closed captioning, so I think my screen looks a little bit different than yours, but if you would like to see subtitles, I think you can go to the bottom right of your screen and there should be a CC button, and you can click that to turn on the subtitles. And if you have any troubles with that, throw it in the chat and I'll see what I can do to kind of support that. So with all that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie, Executive Director of the Center for Race and Culture and our partner in this work. And she's today's moderator.
Thank you, Emma. Good morning, everyone. It's great to join this session and be with you today. As Emma mentioned, our focus in this session is on accessibility, what it means to be truly accessible for us in the sector. We hope to kind of dive into some important conversations on what an accessible organization looks like. And in conversation with our guest speakers, we hope to provide some strategies to increase accessibility within organizations and kind of learn how to support accessibility for the communities that we serve and also for the employees who work with us in our organization. So I have 3 amazing guest speakers today. We have Sam Mason, who is the Accessibility Coordinator at Voice of Albertans with Disability. Sam has a Bachelor of Commerce from MacEwan University, where she focused on marketing, economics, and sociology. Sam's passion for creating a truly inclusive society and their experience in business has allowed her to kind of advocate to the private and public sectors to commit to accessibility and inclusion. Sam is currently the board president for the Coalition of Justice and Human Rights, and also the director at the Sexual Violence Advocacy and Accountability Network. Welcome, Sam. Then we have Nadine Shalifu, who is an independent disability housing and Indigenous rights advocate with a multitude of lived experience and education. She is of Cree descent, and although she's an urban Indigenous woman, she's connected with her culture every chance she gets. Her advocacy for navigating the social, political, and health service systems for marginalized citizens of Edmonton has earned her a 2019 Roof Award, and that's ROOPH. Welcome, Nadine. Great to see you again. And we also have Karen Unger, who is the Accessibility Work Experience Program Coordinator at the University of Alberta Career Center. Karen works with post-secondary students and alumni with a permanent disability or mental health diagnosis that is impacting their ability to find and maintain meaningful employment related to their education and experience. She's also a volunteer coach with Special Olympics Alberta and the volunteer event director for Motion Ball Edmonton. Very nice to have you all and welcome to this session. Let's just dive in. I will start with my first question, and for the first question, I will pick someone, and then you know what, let's go Sam, Nadine, Karen, and then for the other ones, we kind of decide. So if you want to add something, if you're like, no, I'm good, you know, let's skip this question, you have the right to do that. So in this series, we start with terminology, with definitions, just making sure that we are all have the same common understanding of these concepts. When Emma and I were putting the questions together, we kind of looked at the definitions. Accessibility Services Canada, we found this definition that says accessibility is the design of products, services, devices, or environments for people who experience disabilities. Does this resonate with you? And how do you define accessibility? And also, if you want to kind of talk about disability as well. Sam, to you.
Oh, how am I so lucky to start this? So my name is Sam. I am just going to do a brief visual description of myself. I am a younger white woman with big clear glasses and red hair, and I'm wearing a black top, and I am in my office that has a blurred background so no one can see my mess. So accessibility, I think this definition is actually fairly good. Accessibility is one of those words that is subject to a lot of definition wobble and means a lot of different things to different people, especially depending on the sector that you're in. It can have a lot of different ideas. Because I work with different industries very often, working with the public and private sector, I tend to cater my definition to whoever I'm speaking with. But the definition we more broadly use is the removal of barriers. That's what accessibility really is to whatever population that you're talking to. And like we know with people with disabilities, they exist in all populations. So however, I had this little anecdote when I was preparing for this. I once really early in this position went to an ice skating program was putting on a forum to kind of talk about accessibility for their ice skating program. So I went to it and I sat there and I realized they wanted to reach more people. It was really just how do we market our program a little bit better. It wasn't talking about adaptive equipment. It wasn't talking about how do we clear the snow to the ice rink. So I thought it was wasting my time. But in reality, reaching more people still means reaching people with disabilities. It doesn't necessarily mean that they need to have adapted ice skating equipment. They could, still be trying to reach the deaf community, which has no issues skating on in a regular program. So I'm not really answering the question. This definition seems fine. It's very, very clean. I want to say it's very kind of sterile. And I think it's just really hard. It's easier to connect with whoever you're talking to when you define accessibility, using kind of examples that resonate with them. But I'll leave it there because I could probably go on forever.
Thank you so much. That was great. Yeah, and I think, you know, in this sector and in the series, what we want for our participants is just some of the stories, some of the experiences that you share, and they relate to that, and they're like, okay, that makes sense. Yes, in the context of my work, my experiences, my challenges. Thank you so much. Nadine, would you like to add anything to that?
Hi, yes, I would actually. I actually have, as a person with disabilities, I don't think that it's appropriate to say that we experience disabilities because we live with them every day. It's not an experience. It's not something we've gained and we can pass on to others. It's an actual lived life. We don't experience it. It's who we are. So to say that these definitions, I think they're basic in definitions for accessibility. Like Sam said, it's just tools to help us get over the barriers. I also think that it's services for people who live with disabilities. It should be more detailed, more in depth, because it's not a new concept. It's not something that just happened in the last decade. People have been living with disabilities of all degrees for decades, centuries, you know. And centuries ago, it was perceived as a defect, as something that, you know, you would actually put your child down for. So the fact that we're living with them now in an environment that should be more than just accepting, but, you know, accountable and accommodating, I think is just the beginning of the definition for it.
Thank you so much, Nadine, for that. Karen, would you like to add something to that?
Sure. What I will add is just, I think the definition is very kind of practical and tangible and basic, like the previous presenters have said. But when I think about accessibility, I always like to bring it to the attitude and the mindset behind what we're trying to accomplish when we talk about a word like accessibility. So really, there's a lot of creativity and a lot of questioning the typical ways of doing things, or questioning the way things have always been done, and being open to rethink the way that things are done and the way that things are structured and the way that things are organized, and just be shifting in attitude even before we look, or as part of the practice of looking at the tools and the strategies and the structures that are in place.
Thank you so much. So Karen, now that I have you here, and you know, let's start with you for the next question. So knowing the resource struggles that many nonprofit organizations are faced with, how do you think funders can support accessibility? What is the role of funders? You know, foundations, community foundations, or different levels of government that provide funding. There are different funding streams for nonprofit organizations to apply for. So what do you think their role is, and how they can support nonprofit organizations as, you know, we are having these conversations and we are trying to promote accessibility and making it a reality within our organizations?
This is a really tricky question to answer. The program that I've been coordinating at the university for the last 3 years is government. It's funded through a government grant. And I've had previous experiences of working within nonprofit organizations that also are government grant run. And so I recognize the limitations and the challenges of working within a granting structure that has, limited definitions or limited boundaries in terms of how funds can be spent and where funds can be used. I think one of the things that I push back against a lot, and I try and question as often as possible, is that sort of narrow definition and the narrow, even something as simple as the forms that are used and the reporting that is required when it comes to organizations reporting on how they're using funding or even applying for grants. There are very narrow criteria, and I know that there need to be criteria in order to allocate funds to different organizations. But one of the things that I would push back when it comes to funders is again rethinking those narrow definitions and the narrow boundaries within which funding can be spent and then how it has to be reported on. Because a lot of times I think organizations spend more time reporting on and applying for funding than actually using it, and using it in a way that's actually going to benefit the populations that they serve, as opposed to creating a product that fits within the mold of what the funder is expecting. So I guess if I were to push back against foundations and funders and all of that, I would say really rethink the way that you're defining things and allow the people who are going to be benefiting from the funding to have a hand in how those definitions are created and how those funding applications are created. So I will leave it at that.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Sam.
There we go. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. There's also inherently just granting applications are inherently inaccessible. In general, PDFs are not screen readable, language is not plain. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff I could go into there. I think some really easy ways is creating specific accessibility funding would be pretty awesome. The Enabling Accessibility Fund at the Government of Canada is a good kind of starting place if anyone wanted to model after that. That's usually for built environment accessibility, but it's a place to start. I would think also, weighting some applications higher on if they include accessibility into their project. Like I don't know if I've said it, but accessibility is a lens. So no matter what project I'm doing, I still need to require that project be accessible, because people with disabilities live in every single population and might be accessing that program or working on that project. So I would say making sure that, if someone puts funding for ASL and captioning in a budget, that maybe that gets weighted higher than someone who wouldn't, as an example. I would also say, and this one's a little bit intense, but there's an advocate out of Ontario, David Lepofsky, and he has been pushing for a very, very long time for our government levels procurement and funding models to have a certain level of standards that you have to meet for accessibility. And if you don't meet those standards, then you don't get money. I know that maybe we're not in a place right now to do that, but that would be a really great way to kind of get things to change. That's more in the private sector where they have the resources that we don't necessarily have. But I think it would be a good direction to move, is you have to meet this certain standard, or in 5 years, you have to meet this certain standard. There's all kinds of creative ways, and I am not in any way a fund developer, so I'm sure other people have better ideas than I do.
Thank you, Sam. Yes, both you and Karen, you kind of highlighted some important issues here. And, for us as a nonprofit organization, we apply for funding, and we know that sometimes the funding structures, they're so far away from anything inclusive and equitable, right? And I think it's important for having those particular accessibility funding streams to support organizations to increase and strengthen accessibility within their organization. That's one important piece. But also, I think what would really help is sometimes, we design a product, we have our own intentions, but based on our own experiences. And I think that's one of the challenges with many funders. They are not in the shoes of nonprofit organizations applying for funding. And sometimes the criteria, they're so limiting, right? And it more than anything, as Karen, you mentioned, we spent hours and hours trying to mold our project into that box that, what they have defined for us. And it's just a waste of energy and resources. But that's a reality. Nadine, to you, what do you think?
Well, as an advocate, I have two different lenses, one being living with a disability and the other advocating for people who have barriers in their life, which is really a form of disability. I have two questions I would ask any organization, nonprofit, profit, who want to apply for funding. Why do you want it? What is the purpose of that funding? And two, are you including the people who require this funding in your decision making and in your implementation? Because if you can't answer either of those, or you say no to either of those, then you are not to be applying for that funding, because you're taking it away from an organization who can do all those things, who can provide the help that is needed specifically for the people it is geared for. So don't try to say, well, we want to be, accessible and provide that, but do you have the purpose for it? Do you really need to have that? Do you have people coming to your office who require, you only have stairs and you need an elevator or a lift? Then maybe yes. But if you really don't have any interactions with people with disabilities, whether they're visual, hearing, physical, mental, developmental, if you don't have that connection, there's no need for that funding for you. So think about it first, really ask those questions to yourself, and then you can go about funding, because it, like Sam said, it's not an easy process to go through. The language is very complicated and it's intended to be so. So you're applying for that is just adding more work for the people who want to give out the funding. And it's also taking time away from those organizations that need the funding, can use the funding, know how to get the funding, but you're taking that time for that consideration for them to have it when you're applying with no purpose, no real need. It needs to be people who need it.
Great points. Great points. Thank you so much. I like it that we are looking at it from different angles, and I love that. It just enriches the conversation. Thank you so much. So my next question, I want to start with Karen. So what are your suggestions to nonprofit organizations specifically, because this is our audience here, when it comes to workplace accommodations in order to have more inclusive work environments?
Well, Ellie, as you know, this is something I am very passionate about, and it goes back to that concept of attitude and starting with attitude and really thinking about it from the biggest picture. One of the things, and I will start this by saying that I'm not a person who lives with disability. And so I recognize that, and I recognize that I can't speak on behalf of people who live with disability. I try and listen, and I try and incorporate what I have heard from those that I have worked with over my career. But I do also recognize that I come from a lens of a person who does not live with disability in the definition of disability. But what I will say is there is so much onus that is placed on the person living with disability. They are the ones who have to advocate for themselves. They are the ones who have to approach an employer and ask for accommodations. They are the ones who have to accept whatever accommodation is given to them as though it were, the most amazing thing. They are the ones who are constantly put on the spot to be the person who's advocating all of the time. So I think that a really good starting point is for organizations to take a more proactive approach to accommodations and to not wait for people to come to them and to ask and to continuously ask, but to make the conversation something that is open and to make an environment where it's not up to the person with the disability to constantly have to be the one who is advocating, but to really rethink what accommodation means within the organization and to have those conversations with everyone. What is it that's going to help our organization to be successful? What is it that's going to help each individual within the organization to be successful? And let's start from that standpoint. It shouldn't be a conversation that happens once at the time of hiring. It shouldn't be, what accommodations do you need to do this job? It should be an ongoing conversation, and it should be a conversation that is normalized. And again, the onus should not always be put on the person who lives with disability to have to constantly be advocating for themselves, because that is exhausting and that leads to a whole other set of challenges.
Absolutely, you're right. Thank you. Nadine, would you like to add anything there?
Absolutely. I do agree completely with Karen. You know, if you're an organization and you don't understand fully what accessibility means, try using the word barriers. And then think of as many people as you can think of, maybe not that you physically know, that might have a potential barrier, like someone who is blind, like someone who is deaf, like someone, you know, who has a developmental disability. Mental health is a disorder as well, a disability that can be a barrier to your everyday living and functionality. So if you look at it that way, it's a little easier to understand, but yet if you're, you know, you still need to be educated on it. You still need to, like I said, reapproach the question every once in a while to the people who are in need of it. But if you don't know, there are so many excellent agencies out there that specifically work with disabilities, like Voices for Albertans with Disability. Great one. There's so many more. I mean, it's a bigger list than people think. Approach them, ask them for them to teach you about this topic, this huge impact in life for people. I believe when we did a series a while ago, it's a large portion of the population that live with one form or another of a disability, but yet we're not accommodated for. We're not included in the discussions on how to do things. We're not even considered in the discussion on light changes at the crosswalk and how long it takes. I can never get across a crosswalk on time, and I can leave the second it changes, and I still can walk with a walker. Could you imagine an 80-year-old lady with a cane who has a bad back and lots of arthritis? There's no way she's gonna get halfway on a crosswalk, because those timers are not set for people with disabilities. They're set for able-bodied people. So you need to know how to include that conversation in order to decide what kind of funding you need and how much you need and what you're going to do with it.
Very important. So the expertise is out there. For some of us, some of the organizations, we are new in this space. We don't have the expertise. We can reach out. We can ask for help, ask for guidance. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sam.
Yeah, I think both, obviously, of these ladies made very, very good points. First of all, include people, like Nadine was saying, like, you need to include lived experience. Please don't ever make a policy or practice without doing that. I just came out of a conference actually that talked a lot about employment, because it's Disability Employment Awareness Month, as I'm sure everyone, maybe not everyone knows, but look it up, Dean. I would say asking, like, it's really not that hard if you ask the question, like, put it out there and give examples. I do a whole piece on duty to accommodate and job postings, just even especially in this conference. Most of this happens when it comes to workplace long before onboarding. It's about where you're posting your job, how you're posting your job, what language is in your job. Do I really need to be able to carry 50 pounds to do this job? Or is that just something that you pulled off of a regular job posting? Like, really, like Karen says, you really need to change that attitude, really rethink. Do I maybe once need to lift 50 pounds and I have a coworker who can just do that for me? There's a lot of ways to rethink the way, even our interviewing process is like inherently designed to like get you, which is just not, I think it's shifting and we're seeing that, but it's really a reframing and a reshifting of your attitudes. I had another point I was gonna make. I totally lost it. But yeah, and accommodation, oh, that's what it was. Karen was saying, accommodation is an ongoing conversation you have with everyone, because maybe I just had a baby. And so now my needs are different and I might need to be accommodated that I come into it 2 hours later off of my mat leave. Or accommodation is a conversation for everyone. Like Nadine was saying, these are all barriers. And everyone experiences barriers throughout their life, because disability is our word. We never defined it in the beginning, basically saying my society is creating a barrier that I can't participate fully. So for me, I mean, I technically have a disability if I take my glasses off, but now I am accommodated and I can do things that I wouldn't be able to do. So it's reframing the conversation around like someone in a wheelchair, someone who's fully blind, fully deaf, and those are your three that you consider and you accommodate for. It's everyone needs accommodation at some point. And it's 21% in Alberta of people with disabilities, and that's only going to grow. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Yes, I agree with you. Nadine's suggestion for us, thinking about accessibility and kind of looking at barriers that are there, right? And I think part of it is it needs to be in conversation, an ongoing conversation with employees. This is not a one-time thing. We need to reach out to the organizations that have the expertise, that they can provide the support and the guidance for us. I think it's okay to say that, you know what, we don't know. We don't know, but we are open to learning, we are humble, and we will be grateful for that support, right? So I think that's the right mentality. Another challenge, I think, and I have noticed that working with different organizations, is sometimes we see a gap in our language or policies. We hire a consulting firm and we ask them to draft some policies for us. We add it, to our personnel policy handbook, and we're like, done. We did it. All is done. And we are good. But then when you kind of sit back and you reflect on the everyday practices within the organization, you see that it's not part of the culture. It's not normalized. People are uncomfortable to talk about those barriers, and that's I think is super important to address and to think about. Policies are very important, but they need to be living documents, right? We need to kind of breathe them every day. We need to, those are the words that define relationships within the organization, between the employer and the employee, and amongst the colleagues. But at the same time, I am aware of the importance of those policies and those plans, right? So this is my next question. So what are some steps organizations can take in order to commit to being more accessible, right? Because, organizations with their EDI learning journeys, they're at different levels of readiness. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. Where should we start from, right? So is it starting with some assessment? Is it starting with drafting policies, doing employee experience surveys, like where do you think they can start, and what are some of the fundamental steps they can take if this is something new for them? And let's start with Nadine.
Thank you. That's a fantastic question. And I think, first of all, you want to assess the situation. Are your staff requiring some sort of an accessibility service or device, or what kind of needs do they have to be fully functional in your organization? And then who are your clients? Who are the people that readily visit your office, that you interact with? Who are those people and what are their needs? And if you just have one or two people that come into your office that have a physical disability or a visual or hearing disability, just to start with those three, then you need to accommodate them. You need to see that one person represents thousands of people. And if you look at it that way, then you realize that the importance of you accommodating them is vital. It's not just a step to take to make them more comfortable. It's a vital need that they have to have. The conversation needs to also see language. Do we develop that in policy? I would say no, because you're placing a judgment on the person living with disabilities and saying that you have to be considered special. This shouldn't be a policy, because it should be everyday need, everyday work, everyday inclusion. Because those things take away the judgment, and judgment is the biggest barrier that anybody with any disability faces. So you need to take away that judgment. That judgment is huge. That judgment is very precise, and such simple steps can take that away. Another step would be, if you're going to go and acquire a specialist to do your strategic plan,
Nadine, I think there's a problem with your internet connection. Well, it happens. We all know, right? That's what we've learned. Nadine, okay, you're back? We have you. Okay, go ahead. So Nadine, we kind of lost you for about 30 seconds. Yeah.
Sorry. I was just saying, like, if you have the questions, you ask somebody to say, you know, we want to create a strategic plan, so you hire someone to come build it and work with you. Then you need to hire the same professional to help you understand how to best improve your environment to be fully accessible, to bring any attention to any barriers you might have, and to help you eliminate them to the best ability that you can.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's go to Karen.
Okay, the one thing that has come up for me in this question is I know that a lot of organizations spend a lot of time crafting an EDI statement or a commitment to inclusion and diversity might be in their job posting, it might be on their website. And one of the things that I have challenged the participants that I work with to do is when they go into an interview is to ask their employer, to ask the interviewer to give examples of, you know, what does your workplace do to embody this statement of EDI that you have on your website? Or, you know, can you give me an example of how you create an inclusive environment in your workplace? So I think that having policy and having well-crafted EDI statements, it's not a bad thing. It can be a really positive thing, in fact, but it needs to be a lived experience and not a statement to cover your bases. So I would say, you know, really making sure that everybody within the organization really understands what that EDI statement means, and not just what the words mean, but what it looks like, how it is demonstrated, how it is acted out in everyday workplace culture. and to be prepared to answer that question. If someone comes into an interview and says, can you tell me how you live out your EDI statement, to be able to answer that, and for every person within the organization to be able to answer that. So it's not just the policymakers who can use fancy language to talk about why they have this EDI statement, but for every single employee, you know, those living with disabilities, those not living with disabilities, everyone should be able to answer the question of what is our organization doing to create an inclusive and accessible environment.
Thank you so much for that. And Sam, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's my wheelhouse. This is what I do day in and day out. So I'm like, I could have forever. I think what both of my other panelists have said are absolutely true. We've gone back to this many times, but I actually took umbrage with the funding question for a second because I was like, it doesn't have to be expensive. Not everything is an elevator and a ramp. Most of the barriers experienced are within your culture. It's within the attitudes of the people that work there, and it's how to start shifting that culture and shifting those attitudes. So like doing maybe an assessment, like a honest assessment of what are my misconceptions? What are my misunderstandings? How do I define disability? So if I'm still defining disability as someone in a wheelchair, I have a lot of work to do because it is a huge umbrella term that means anything from episodic disabilities like MS and HIV to, you know, your physical disabilities to, you know, possibly cancer can be included. Like it is a huge, huge term, and it's time to sit with that and figure out what that means for you as an organization. And then again, defining accessibility, like we said, it's a difficult thing to define. Doing some research and seeing what other people are up to. Again, not to plug us, but we're happy to help. This is what we do. Our whole mission is to help people be more inclusive. I've put this one out a few times, but making room for feedback, whether it's for the people you serve or your employees. I like always suggest if you have a website, make sure you have a specific form that asks for accessibility feedback, whether it's about the website or about the use of your services. If you're doing if you've done an event or you've done some kind of programming and you're asking for feedback, as we always do, ensure there's an accessibility question on there to make sure that people know, because you can say, how was it for you, or those types of things, but a lot of the disability community, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nadine, are very resilient, very used to making very creative ways to participate. And so they don't think you're talking to them necessarily if you just ask a general question. And then pick low-hanging fruit. Starting like Zoom auto captioning, I'm not going to say is the be all and end all. It is definitely not great, but it's a start if you would ensure that auto captioning is available on all of your Zoom meetings, because it is 2 buttons, and then it's just anyone can put it on if they need it. And those types of things, like even describing, like doing a self-description of yourself, starting to live these things, even if you don't think anyone in the room needs it. Because first of all, you don't know. And second of all, that's how you demonstrate that because now if I'm watching this on YouTube later, I go, oh, they have captions. That makes me think, oh, you're working at it. And just trying to make every decision through a lens of accessibility. Again, we're a phone call away. You can call us if you're like not sure about things. Not to say that we're necessarily a full expert, because this experience and this lived life is different for every person, even with the same condition or diagnosis, you know. But it's taking those steps and trying to be better today than you were yesterday. And yeah. Again, I can put my contact information in there if anyone wants to reach out to me, because I love doing this stuff, and I'm happy to talk to everyone.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. So I'm now looking at the Q&A box that we have here, and we have received a question from one of our participants. Is there a formal program out there that organizations can go through to check how accessible we are in our work and what barriers still exist that we need to address? Anyone? Nadine, please go ahead. You're on mute, Nadine.
Sorry. Yes, I think there is a program out there, but you can't get any better advice.
Okay, I think Nadine's Wi-Fi is acting up this morning.
I don't know what's going on.
Okay, we have you. We can hear you now.
Oh, I don't know what's going on. That's crazy. Okay.
Go ahead.
You need to include people living with disabilities, people who have to make those decisions every day, people who may not necessarily see themselves having barriers because they've lived with it so long that they've accommodated themselves. But those are the people that are going to give you honest answers, give you accurate advice, as well. They're the people who you want to have come to your organization. So, you know, if you're going to have a panel of people making decisions in a committee in your group, then why not have a group of more than one, because one is not enough, not even close, of people with disabilities, and have them come in and give you advice, you know, go over something that you're going over, check to make sure that you're getting those checks and balances of inclusion for the people who are needed.
Thank you so much. Anyone else?
Yes. I was going to say, just to piggyback off of that and pay them. I know I did say it's not very expensive, but if you're reaching out to people, I get all kinds of surveys sent to me, but of people trying to reach more people with disabilities. But I can tell you, at least our base is like, I don't need to answer any more surveys. Like, I've answered this question for 7 different people. So if you want to have a meaningful conversation and create a meaningful group, search them out and offer them some money. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. Just like if you're going to come to a focus group to just check things out, $100 per person, $150, just depending on the time. But I'm like, yeah, pay people. It's their experience is very, very important. And they're like, you know, spoon theory, to take the energy to do that work for you can be very, very difficult. As for a formal program, there is the Rick Hansen. It's very, very expensive, and it's built environment. As for everything else, I'm not sure if there is. I have checklist upon checklist upon checklist I can provide. I don't think there's anything quite formalized though. And yeah, I think that's, again, you have to ask people's lived experience.
Sam, that is such an important point. You know, pay people for their time, for sharing their experience and helping you improve your workplace environment, improve your programs. And I think that's a challenge that I've seen in the nonprofit sector. I've seen it among academics when they do research. They go to community members, they want their stories, you know. They have these big grants, national grants, they have $1 million. They want to, you know, interview racialized folks, people with disability, you know, and you're like, okay, so are you compensating for their time? They're like, oh, I had no idea. I think for us as nonprofit organizations, it's important to build that into our grant applications. So that way we challenge funders and we normalize it. We're like, okay, so if we are doing focus groups, if we are doing community consultations, we compensate people for their time, for sharing their experiences and expertise with us. So that's an important piece. And usually when you look at it, usually it's women who are approached for their expertise, but if they speak up, it upsets many. It's like, oh, I thought you would just show up as a guest speaker. Or racialized folks, Indigenous, Black, other racialized communities, they are expected to share their experiences with us, same thing. So it's equity-seeking groups, community members, I think it's important to question that, to challenge that, and that's an important piece when it comes to equity and inclusion. We want to build make that part of our practices, our daily practices. So thank you for that, Sam. Karen, would you like to add anything?
No, I think I'm going to leave that one with my two panelists.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I have covered all the questions that I had for you. I invite the participants to use the chat box to share their questions with us if they have any. But I also want to use this opportunity to go back to our guest speakers and say, is there anything based on your experiences, working with different communities, working with different organizations, individuals? Is there any word of advice that you have for us here in this sector? Because I think it is becoming more and more a priority with EDI practices for nonprofit organizations. We want to make sure that we commit to a culture of accessibility within the organization, across the sector, and for the communities that we serve. Any word of advice from any of you?
I can answer this one. One of the things that I think about, again, when it comes to accessibility, a lot of organizations are thinking about accessible recruitment. So in terms of job postings and like Sam has been talking about, where do you post your job in order to recruit a more diverse group of employees? And then, as she also mentioned, there is some work being done with making the interview process more accessible. But I also like to think about accessibility throughout the entire lifespan of employees. So once you have hired somebody with a disability, the accessibility process doesn't stop there. So even thinking through, the training and professional development opportunities that exist within your organization. So is there an opportunity for all people to be able to participate in those training opportunities? Is there going to be ASL interpretation at the conference that you are sending individuals to? Thinking through like advancement opportunities. So once you hire someone with a disability, are you going to then expect them to do the same job for 20 years? And again, goes back to that, you should just be grateful that you've been given a position kind of thing. So adjusting that attitude and providing opportunities for all employees to be able to advance within the organization and to be supported throughout all stages of their career. Because I think that there can be some, there can be some great efforts made at the beginning stages of the job or the employee's lifespan, but it doesn't necessarily go all the way through to the end of all stages of the career.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Very good. So here I have Tanya in the chat box that has kindly shared some resources from the city of Edmonton. We'll make sure to add them to the information document we'll send out to everyone. And Sophie asks, she says, I find a barrier for those who are disabled because they are living with chronic illnesses that manifest daily, weekly as being a reliable worker. I would love to learn more how we can better accommodate this. Any thoughts?
I do. I live with chronic illnesses myself. So yeah, if I wake up in the beginning of the day and I'm not going to be able to do the things I normally do, you're going to be surprised. People with disabilities, with chronic illnesses, with any kind of barrier that they've had to live with for any length of time, we're adaptable and we know how best to adapt for us. So really just having the honest conversation, removing judgment from the conversation, you're going to find that together, you're going to be able to find a solution that's going to work for everybody.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Would you like to add anything to that?
I feel like Karen probably has a better answer. I would just say, like, my first thought when I saw that was, what does reliable mean? Does that mean showing up and being at my desk from 9 to 5? because that might not be a reality, but maybe my outcome is I need to get this, this, and this done. And so maybe I can't get up in the morning, but I'm up at 4 in the morning because I can't sleep now and I have time to do it. So it's again shifting that framing of it. But I'm sure Karen has much more to add.
You know, something I think we have learned during the pandemic is kind of revising and reconsidering our assumptions about different positions. You know, I remember more than a year ago, every job posting was that, you know, you have to come to the office, you need to be located in Edmonton. And now we've learned that no, you can work remotely, you can work efficiently with your colleagues, you can have a workplace culture, people can stay in touch and support each other without being under the same roof together. So maybe that means with our job postings, we need to indicate that, you know, even moving forward, we want this, there is flexibility. People can work remotely. If we don't have, for instance, the Center for Race and Culture, our office is located at Edmonton Intercultural Center or Old Macaulay School. It's a 100-year-old building, no elevator. I was on the board of the organization. We tried to install an elevator in the building, not possible. So what we did in the past, we are not a frontline service provider. It rarely happens that someone from the community comes to our office. But what we did was, if someone comes in and they ask for us, we go to them. It was not the most convenient thing, but we had that conversation. We're like, you know, we walk to the door, there is an area there, we make sure we sit with them, we answer their questions, and we apologize. We're like, this is the situation here, right? And as a nonprofit organization, we cannot afford to move somewhere else at the moment. But with our colleagues, with our employees or future colleagues coming to the organization, asking ourselves, why do we see you need to be located in Edmonton? Why do you need to come to the office every day after the pandemic? Why are we asking for that, right? So I think some of the few positive learnings from the pandemic, correct? Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this wonderful session, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. I learned a lot. I took some notes as you were talking, and I hope our participants found it a useful session as well. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and I will be in touch with all our great guest speakers. Wonderful. Back to you, Emma.
Alrighty. I will echo everything Ellie has just said. I'm so grateful that our panelists were able to join us today. A few people put it in the chat, and I'll just kind of again echo what they've said, is that we had such a wonderful panel today, such a great group with lots of different experience and education and whatnot, and it was just a real pleasure to hear all of you speak, to share your insights, and then I was also taking notes throughout. So like I said at the beginning, we will be sharing a recording of the session. Usually it takes within about a week, and with that recording, we'll also send out a summary document. And that document will summarize kind of some of the key points we discussed today, and we'll also include a resource list. And so some of the resources that were shared in the chat and that our panelists suggested will be included there as well. I know we're right at 11, so definitely just look out for an email from us with that summary document and recording. And we hope to see you join us at our next session as well. And there'll be kind of a link to register for that one. And one last time, thank you so much to all of our panelists and to Ellie for moderating. So thank you all and happy Tuesday.
Thank you.